We will now talk about Chapter 13 about organizational assessment. Actually, I'm just seeing if you're paying attention because, as you may realize, there is no Chapter 13 in the textbook. And actually, that was an ethical dilemma. Remember in the very first chapter, he said ethical dilemmas happen all the time. I wrote a Chapter 13, but it was a business decision. And every textbook can only be so many pages because of estimations in production and all the costs that are associated with that. And when I handed my manuscript into the publisher, they said, too many pages. You need to eliminate X number of pages. And I had the ethical dilemma, so what do? Do I eliminate 4 pages from every chapter? Or do I just eliminate 1 chapter? And I applied my Chapter 5 ethical framework analysis, and I decided, instead of shortchanging each chapter, let me just get rid of Chapter 13. So Chapter 13, that doesn't exist in the book, but we're going to talk about its best practices anyway, is all about assessment. Because if you look at that model that appears in Chapter 2, the Optimal Ethics Model, what you'll see is that last little box about doing assessment, and it just means we need to constantly assess the process of all these best practice benchmarks. So there are 7 items in terms of benchmarking best practices in terms of organizational assessment. Beginning with benchmark item number 84. Our organization systematically examines its ethical performance on an annual basis. So once again, it's great to say we're doing a wonderful job. We've got some of these best practices in place, but do you actually do an assessment? Do you actually measure how well you're doing? So this benchmark is simply asking you, do you do that? And if you go back to the chapter on ethics training workshops and the chapter on code of ethics, one of the easiest things to assess is just to do a workshop with your employees, give them your code of ethics, and say evaluate on a 1 to 5 scale, how well do we live up to each of these values? Going back to Edgewood College, we have the values, say, truth or justice. How truthful are the managers? How truthful are the non-management employees? And hopefully we get 5s. But let's just be hypothetical and say, we only get a 4 on this 1 to 5 scale. And so we look at that item for 4, and we say, how can we improve upon that? So every year you're assessing, and every year you're doing continuous improvement. But in order to do the continuous improvement, you got to measure. So that's benchmark number 84. Benchmark 85. Our organization benchmarks itself to the industry's best ethical practices. So we've been speaking a lot about the optimal ethics model throughout these talks. But what this is saying is that every industry has their best practices. If you Google construction industry, it'll take you to a website by an association for the construction industry, and on their website they list their best practices in terms of ethics. If you Google insurance ethics, that'll take you to a website for the insurance industry, and there you'll find the best practices in business ethics for the insurance industry. If you're a doctor, just Google medical ethics or physician's ethics. That'll take you to some website which will list the best practices for doctors in terms of ethical behavior. So what your organization can do is you can benchmark yourself then to the best practices for your particular industry. And once again, everything is continuous improvement. Measure yourself on these 1 to 5 scales, praise the good, be honest about where you're weak, but then transform the weakness into a strength, which means coming up with strategies and doing action plans. Benchmark item number 86. Our organization benchmarks itself to the optimal ethics systems model. So this is what we've been doing throughout the textbook. I have all of my MBA returning adult students as well as my undergraduate students use exactly what we've been going through, all of these benchmarks, and they assess their organizations using these benchmarks. And let's just talk about the MBA students, because my MBA students are full-time managers for organizations throughout Madison, Wisconsin, and Dane County. So let's say they happen to be working for an insurance company. Every week we go through these best practices, we discuss them in small groups, we do a lot of other nice little activities. And then for the final exam, they use all of these best practices, and it's simply a simple scale. Yes, we do the best practice. No, that's a 3. A 2 would be sometimes. Sometimes we do the best practice. And then 1 is we don't do it at all. And they measure each other for each chapter on all these best practices and come up with their scores. And so then by the end of the semester, they have a snapshot of their organization based upon the 90 best practices in business ethics coming out of the literature. And that's fantastic. And then once again, they praise the good, they find the weakness. And so for each category, let's say we were doing hiring ethics. They look at the benchmarks for hiring ethics. They praise what's good. They find that weakness. Let's say the weakness is they don't do background checks. Then they come up with a recommendation. We should do background checks. It's pretty cheap to do now. In fact, I can do it for free just by Googling the person's name. So, or I can pay a minimum fee for somebody else to do that. And that's your recommendation. And so by the end of the semester, all the students have a list of changes to make. And then I push them and I say, out of all your recommendations, choose one. And before the semester is over, talk to the person in charge of that and say, this is an area I want to improve in our organization. What do you think about that? So I challenge them, if at all possible, to make one positive change in their organization based upon their own self-analysis. And then when the semester is over, I say, you'll find your take-home final exam is your to-do list for the next 5 years. You've got all these recommendations. Do one at a time. Don't overwhelm yourself. Don't stress yourself out. Do one. Do a low-hanging fruit. Don't do the hardest one first. Do the easiest one first. Claim success, and then go to the next one. And it's a wonderful experience, and that's what this benchmark is asking you to do, to benchmark your organization to everything that we've just discussed about in all these videos. Benchmark item number 87. Our organization collects information from suppliers and customers about our ethical performance. So in the previous benchmark, you're doing it yourself. This one is saying, reach out and do surveys of your customers and saying, here's a couple items about our ethics. Tell us how we're doing. Do we reply to your complaints within a reasonable amount of time? Are you happy? Are you satisfied with the way that we respond to your complaints? So you're reaching out to get that, because once again, you might think you're doing a great job, but you're biased favorably. We all are. We're all biased favorably toward our own points of view. So the customer may see things differently than you think of yourself. So you're getting that data in. You can also do your suppliers, and you can ask your suppliers, how well are we doing? I've done the supplier side for a couple organizations, and even though I recommend it, it's good to do, but believe it or not, suppliers are going to lie when they fill out their ethics analysis of your behavior. And why do suppliers do that? Because they're afraid that if they say anything bad about you, you won't do business with them anymore. So sometimes that kind of a survey doesn't work best, but you might want to then do focus groups with your suppliers. Because it's important to understand, how does your supplier perceive you as ethical? Do you pay your bills on time? Because the supplier needs you to pay your bills on time so that they can pay their bills on time. So if you want to have good partnerships with suppliers, you want to get information from them, you can do a survey if your supplier is very transparent and honest. But if your supplier is afraid that they might lose business if they say something negative about you, then do focus groups and have an independent third-party consultant do that for you. Benchmark item number 88. Unethical behaviors are tracked to their systematic cause. What does this mean? Every now and then an organization will contact me and they'll say, an employee embezzled money, and we think we've solved the problem because we fired that person. Anyway, can you come and visit us and just do a little research on this and see if that's the case? So sometimes when you fire the unethical person, you think you've solved the problem. If you go back to chapter 2, there's a nice little chart at the very end of chapter 2 that gives you a step-by-step process that says that may not solve the problem. So let's say there is an embezzlement that's taken place. If you use the optimal ethics checklist analysis that's mentioned in chapter 2, what you do is you say, this person was unethical. Who hired that person? How did we end up hiring somebody that would embezzle $50,000 from the customer or from us? How did we do that? So then you might want to look at your hiring system. And how did that happen? So let's say actually your hiring system in terms of ethics, you do all the best practices in hiring ethics. In that case, you might want to look at your ethics training. Do we do embezzlement as part of our ethics training? If not, then you might want to do one. And as I mentioned when I was talking about workshops, I've done workshops like this where I will just ask a group of people, if I'm an unethical employee and if I wanted to embezzle $10,000 from this company, how would I do it? And all the hands go up. They all know how to do it, even though they would never do that. But they know how it can get done. So then you want to say, maybe we should do ethics training to say, hey, this you shouldn't be doing these kinds of things. And you want to put in changes in terms of your operations so that embezzlement can't get done. Role model problem. Who is the role model for this employee? In this case, I want to talk to the embezzler's boss. Why didn't the boss know this person was embezzling $10,000? It could be because the embezzler is just an evil person and does it without anybody knowing this. Or it could be maybe the boss is doing some shady stuff. And the embezzler says, if my boss can cheat on his or her expense account, maybe I can steal $10,000. Why not? My boss is getting away with cheating on expense reports. Maybe I can get away with that. So I would want to check that out. I would want to check out the person's boss. Now let's say the person has a fantastic boss. So you got a great hiring process. You do great ethics training. You've got a great role model boss for the embezzler. I want to look at the embezzler's work goals. Maybe the reason why the embezzler was stealing from the company was because the work goals were so hard to accomplish that there was no way the employee could earn a bonus. But they needed money because their spouse has an illness, or they needed money because their son or daughter wants to go to some college or university that charges $60,000 instead of going to the public university nearby. And all of a sudden there's this money crunch, and they're looking around and they're saying, I can't earn any money through my bonus system because it doesn't exist in this organization. I need money. And all of a sudden the mind begins to wander. So I want to look at the person's work goals. Do you have a system in place that it clearly says if you perform well, you're going to earn a bonus? Similar to performance appraisals. Let's say your organization is doing best practices in performance appraisals. If you're doing them every year, as is recommended in that particular chapter, why didn't the performance appraisal pick up that this person was an embezzler? And in studies on embezzlers, when they catch embezzlers and they ask the employees, or I ask the employees about this after the fact, they always say, I thought that person was doing something funny. I had a feeling that person was stealing money. It was just this gut feeling. And then I have to ask myself, are you doing 360-degree performance evaluations? Because if you're doing 360-degree performance evaluations, and if one of those measures is, can I trust this person? And if the coworkers say, I think this person is stealing money, they're not going to give the person the highest score on trust. They would score them lower. And then you would have to research that. Why is it that all the scores on trust is kind of low for Harry? And then when you find out, it's because people think Harry's not trustworthy because Harry seems to anytime they look at him, Harry logs off the computer, or Harry does, and acts really funny about stuff. So people sense this stuff, and you want to look at it. So you want to look at each of the steps of the optimal ethics system and then go through them all. And sometimes, let's say you ace the optimal ethics systems analysis. Some people are just crooks. Some people are just crooks, and sometimes it happens and you make a mistake, and that happens. So then sometimes just firing that person, the problem is solved. But what I'm suggesting here is that don't think that just by firing the person you've solved the problem. You want to view this as all of these are kind of like ethics leaks, and you want to make sure that all the patches are in place so that it doesn't happen again. Benchmark item number 89. Corrective actions are taken when unethical behaviors occur, and managers are held accountable for implementing appropriate changes and achieving improved results. Once again, we've discussed this at an earlier chapter, but it's worth emphasizing again. A lot of times people see unethical behaviors and then they decide, I don't want to make an issue of it. It's personal. It's interpersonal. And I don't want to have a discussion with people about their bad side. I just hope they're going to change. I hope that they're just going to know that it's wrong, but that usually doesn't happen. As it's shown over and over again, unethical people, they do a little bit that's wrong, and if nobody challenges them on it, they do a little bit more that's wrong. It's like a child in the cookie jar. First the kid takes one cookie and gets away with it, and let's say you're the parent and you say you can't have any cookies, so first they steal one cookie, they get away with that, then they steal a second cookie. They get away with that, they steal a third cookie. We all have an inner child in us. So the same method and the same pattern exists in adults. If adults can get away with a little bit, then they get away with a little bit more the next time, and then they're always pushing it. So this says, assess yourself and just be real clear. What unethical behaviors took place over the past year, and did we punish that person? Or at the very least, have we warned them don't do that again? It's good to forgive, but if you forgive twice, you're going to get abused. So you forgive once, and some things you just can't forgive. Let's say it's sexual harassment. You just have to say, George, that is unacceptable no matter what. I'm sorry. You're fired, and you're fired for that particular behavior. And the person might say, please forgive me, please work this out. And let's say you're feeling very humane, and you want to help that person, you want to give them a second chance. Keep in mind, there's a victim. And how does the victim of sexual harassment feel when the harasser is forgiven? There's some damage of trust that's done, and it's real hard to recover that trust that's damaged. So you want to be real careful about that. So you want to make sure your managers implement the changes and that the results happen as are desired. The very, very last benchmark for this particular organizational assessment area, relevant information about the organization's ethical performance is shared with the CEO. You don't want to keep all this good news to yourself. You want to share this with your boss and your boss's boss, and you want to share this up the chain of command. Don't be shy about this. Don't think you're bragging. It's not about bragging. Basically, you're just saying, these are the best practices, and I'm implementing the best practices. And I'm implementing these best practices not because I'm bragging, but I'm doing this because it helps the organization. This improves our organization, it improves operations. We're much more transparent, we're much more understanding, we're a real community of people, we help each other out, and we're the kind of organization that we dream about. We're the kind of organization that we all want to be a member of. And the CEO should be proud of that, and then the CEO should give that feedback to all the employees and say, we are doing very, very well. This is fantastic. Oh, by the way, next year, let's do even better. Because life is one huge continuous improvement project. And that concludes this particular section on organizational assessment best practices.